I'll start by saying my wife, let's call her Emily, is, by all accounts, the kind of woman people dream about marrying. Cheerful, thoughtful, and selfless to a fault. When she walks into a room, it feels like the lights dim just so she can shine a little brighter. When we first started dating, I couldn't believe someone like her would even look at me, let alone go out with me. But Emily had a history, one everyone in our town seemed to know about before I did. She had been in a long-term, picture-perfect relationship with a guy named Nathan. You know the type, charming, well-connected, and the heir to his dad's company. Together, they were the local golden couple. People literally called them the couple of the year. 3 years in a row, no less. When I first met Emily, I didn't think much about her past. People have exes. That's normal. What caught my attention was how abruptly her relationship with Nathan ended. No dramatic breakup, no cheating rumors, just, poof, over. Everyone in town had been stunned. And here's the kicker, after their breakup, Emily kept her job working under Nathan. He was her boss at his father's company. She told me it wasn't weird for her, and it wasn't something I needed to worry about. At first, I believed her. Why wouldn't I? But you know how sometimes, something just doesn't sit right? That was me. The more I learned about their so-called perfect past, the more curious I became about why it all fell apart. It wasn't jealousy, I swear. I didn't want to know about Nathan because I thought Emily still loved him. It was more like, imagine being handed a mystery novel with the last chapter ripped out. You're not going to rest until you know how it ends, right? That's how I felt about Emily's history. Little did I know, my curiosity would unravel a reality I was completely unprepared for. I still remember the first time Emily and I met like it happened yesterday. It was at a local cafe, one of those cozy spots with mismatched furniture and a chalkboard menu. I was there to catch up with a friend, but the moment Emily walked in, my focus shifted entirely. She had this glow about her, like she'd stepped out of a photo album. Her laugh was contagious, and her kindness toward the staff and even strangers made her stand out in a way I couldn't ignore. We got introduced through a mutual acquaintance that day, and the conversation flowed so easily it felt like we'd known each other for years. I'd heard whispers about her before, of course. That's Nathan's ex, people would say. But in that moment, she wasn't anyone's ex, she was just Emily. And, wow, she was something special. After our chance meeting, I couldn't get her out of my head. I'm not exactly the most confident guy when it comes to women, but I decided to take a chance and ask her out. To my surprise, and honestly, my disbelief, she said yes. Our first date was magical. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. She told me about her family, her love for photography, and her dreams of one day starting her own business. There was something so genuine about her. She wasn't trying to impress me or play any games, she was just herself. What struck me most, though, was her warmth. Emily had a way of making you feel like the most important person in the world. She'd listen intently, remember the smallest details, and always find a way to make you laugh. It wasn't long before I was completely smitten. But there was one topic that seemed to shift the mood every time it came up, her past with Nathan. Whenever I asked about it, not prying, just casually, Emily would give vague answers or quickly change the subject. "Oh, that's ancient history," she'd say with a dismissive laugh. Or, "We just grew apart. It happens." I didn't push her on it. Not at first. Why would I? Things between us were incredible. We started spending more time together, and it didn't take long for me to realize she was different. She'd show up at my place with my favorite snacks, just because, or leave little notes in my car with cheesy jokes to brighten my day. She even got along famously with my mom, which, let me tell you, is no small feat. We became that couple everyone envied, the ones who seemed so perfectly in sync. I didn't mind the whispers from people around town, the curious glances and the questions about how I'd won over someone like Emily. If anything, it made me want to prove to the world, and to her, that I was worthy of her love. But no matter how good things were, that nagging feeling about her past lingered in the back of my mind. I wasn't obsessed with it, but I couldn't help but wonder, how could something as seemingly perfect as her relationship with Nathan have ended so suddenly? And why did she still work under him? She assured me that they were strictly professional and that their breakup hadn't been messy. "We're adults," she'd say with a shrug, like it was no big deal. And she always said it with such sincerity that I wanted to believe her. So I did. For the first year, everything seemed flawless. Emily was attentive, affectionate, and consistent. There wasn't a single red flag. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. She'd even let me pick her up from work sometimes, although she'd joke that it made her feel like a teenager. She'd show me her phone without hesitation if I asked her to check a message. If there was anything to hide, she was either exceptionally good at it or there was nothing to hide at all. Still, the mystery of Nathan, and why their breakup was so hush-hush, stuck with me. One day, out of sheer curiosity, I asked her best friend about it. That was the first time I noticed cracks in the foundation of our seemingly perfect relationship. Her best friend just froze. For a woman who usually couldn't stop talking, she suddenly had nothing to say. She looked at me like I'd asked her to reveal a state secret, then quickly changed the subject. That moment left me uneasy, but I told myself I was overthinking. At the time, I chalked it up to my own insecurities. I had Emily, and she loved me, so what did it matter what happened before me? Little did I know, the truth was lurking just below the surface, waiting for the perfect moment to shatter everything I thought I knew. The first time I felt that pang of jealousy, it hit me like a sucker punch to the gut. Emily and I were scrolling through her old photos one evening, reminiscing about her college days. As she flipped through the images, laughing at her younger self and her outdated fashion choices, there it was, a picture of her and Nathan. It wasn't just any photo. It was a photo of them in front of a private jet, both dressed to the nines, her arm wrapped around his waist as he looked every bit the suave, successful businessman. They looked like the kind of couple you'd see in a magazine, and for a moment, I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. "Wow," I said, trying to sound casual. "You guys looked happy." Emily's expression faltered for the briefest second before she gave me that disarming smile of hers. "Yeah, I guess we did. But that's all in the past. I barely even think about him anymore." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But after that, I couldn't shake the feeling that Nathan was still lingering in the background, like an uninvited ghost at a party. Every time I picked her up from work, I couldn't help but scan the parking lot for his car. If she mentioned him in passing, usually about work-related things, I'd try to keep my cool, but inside, my mind would race. I started overanalyzing everything. Why had they broken up? Was it mutual, or had Nathan dumped her? Did she still have feelings for him? And, more importantly, did he still have feelings for her? One evening, as we were watching TV, I finally blurted out the question that had been eating away at me. "Do you ever regret breaking up with Nathan?" Emily's head whipped toward me, her cheerful demeanor replaced with confusion, and a hint of irritation. "What? Why would you ask that?" I shrugged, trying to seem nonchalant. "I don't know. You guys seemed like... I mean, everyone says you were perfect together." Her eyes softened, and she reached out to take my hand. "That's because they didn't see what was really going on. We weren't perfect. Far from it." "Then why don't you ever talk about it?" I pressed gently. Her smile faded, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. Guilt? Sadness? Frustration? "Because it's not worth talking about," she said quietly. "I'm with you now, and that's all that matters." Her words should have reassured me, but they didn't. If anything, they only deepened my curiosity. I started noticing Nathan's presence everywhere. Not physically, thankfully, but in conversations, in stories she'd tell, and in the way her coworkers would awkwardly change the subject whenever his name came up. It was like he was this larger-than-life figure I could never quite compete with, no matter how hard I tried. At one point, I even considered confronting him directly. I imagined walking into his office, looking him in the eye, and demanding to know the truth about their breakup. But what would that have accomplished? Besides, Emily had never given me a reason to doubt her loyalty. She was attentive, loving, and completely transparent, or so I thought. My jealousy reached its peak when I found out about their company's annual holiday gala. Emily casually mentioned it one evening, saying, "Oh, by the way, we have this work event coming up next week. It's super formal, so I'll need to dig out my old cocktail dress. Will Nathan be there?" I asked before I could stop myself. She sighed, a look of exasperation crossing her face. "Of course he will. He's my boss, remember?" I didn't say anything, but my mind was already spinning. The thought of her dressed to the nines, mingling with Nathan under the soft glow of fairy lights and champagne glasses, it was enough to drive me crazy. But here's the thing, the night of the gala came and went, and Emily didn't give me any reason to worry. She texted me throughout the evening, sent me a selfie with her coworkers, and even called me on her way home to tell me she missed me. When she walked through the door, her first words were, "Ugh, remind me never to wear heels again. My feet are killing me." That night, as she curled up beside me on the couch, I realized how ridiculous I'd been. Emily wasn't hiding anything. If anything, she went out of her way to reassure me that I had nothing to worry about. The jealousy began to dissipate after that. I stopped obsessing over Nathan and focused on enjoying what I had with Emily. She was cheerful, kind, and utterly devoted, or so it seemed. But looking back, I can't help but wonder, was her openness genuine, or was it just a masterclass in misdirection? At the time, I thought it was the former. But soon enough, I'd learn just how wrong I was. It happened during what was supposed to be a peaceful Friday night dinner. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. We had just finished setting the table, and Emily had made one of her signature dishes, chicken parmesan with just the right amount of crisp. The smell alone had me salivating. We sat down, the sound of silverware clinking against plates filling the room. She was in a cheerful mood, recounting some funny story about her coworker spilling coffee all over the office printer. I nodded and smiled, but my mind was elsewhere. Nathan. The thought of him had been gnawing at me again. For months, I'd been trying to shake off the lingering questions about their breakup. I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid, that Emily deserved the benefit of the doubt. But the mystery of it all still lingered like a storm cloud I couldn't outrun. The laughter from her story died down, and a comfortable silence settled between us. It felt like the perfect moment to finally ask. So, I began, keeping my tone as casual as possible, "Why did you and Nathan really break up?" Emily froze mid-bite, her fork hovering inches from her mouth. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, and for a moment, she looked genuinely startled. "I've told you already," she said, her voice light but a little too deliberate. "We just didn't work out. It happens. I should have let it go. I really should have." But something about her answer felt too rehearsed, too convenient. "I know that's what you've said," I pressed, setting my fork down. "But you two were together for years, and everyone thought you were perfect for each other. It just seems sudden, you know." Her cheerful demeanor vanished like someone had flipped a switch. She put her fork down slowly and leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "What are you trying to say?" "Nothing," I said quickly, though it was a lie. "I'm just curious. It's like, people don't just wake up one day and decide to end a relationship like that. There has to be a reason, right?" Emily's jaw tightened, and for the first time since we started dating, I saw real anger flash in her eyes. "Why are you so obsessed with this?" she snapped, her voice louder than I'd expected. I blinked, taken aback by her reaction. "I'm not obsessed. I'm just trying to understand." "What's there to understand?" she shot back, her tone sharp and defensive. "We didn't work out. End of story. Why can't you just leave it at that?" Her words hit me like a slap. This wasn't the Emily I knew, the Emily who was always calm, patient, and kind. This was someone else entirely. "I didn't mean to upset you," I said carefully, trying to diffuse the tension. "It's just. I don't get why it's such a sensitive topic." She scoffed, pushing her chair back abruptly and standing up. "Because it's my past," she said, her voice trembling with frustration. "And maybe I don't feel like sharing every little detail of it with you." Her words stung more than I wanted to admit. "I'm your husband, Emily. Shouldn't I know everything about you?" "Maybe you should trust me enough to not need to know everything," she countered, her voice rising. We stared at each other across the table, the air between us thick with unspoken tension. Finally, she shook her head and grabbed her plate. "I've lost my appetite," she muttered, walking into the kitchen. I sat there, staring at the half-eaten food on my plate, my appetite vanishing too. For the next 2 days, Emily barely spoke to me. Her cheerful, sunny disposition was replaced with a cold, standoffish energy that made our house feel like a freezer. Every attempt I made to apologize or explain myself was met with clipped responses or stony silence. By the time we finally broke the silence, it wasn't because we'd resolved anything. It was more like we'd silently agreed to pretend the conversation never happened. But things didn't go back to normal after that. Not really. Something had shifted between us, like a crack in a mirror that's small at first but keeps growing until the entire thing shatters. I'd crossed a line, and while I didn't regret asking the question, I regretted the way it had driven a wedge between us. Still, I couldn't help but feel like her reaction had revealed something important. She wasn't just upset that I'd brought up Nathan. She was angry. Almost like she was trying to hide something. At the time, I told myself I was reading too much into it. After all, Emily was human. Everyone has parts of their past they'd rather not revisit. But deep down, a voice in the back of my mind whispered that there was more to the story than she was letting on. And as it turned out, that voice was absolutely right. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. After that dinner, everything changed. Emily and I didn't fight often, but after my question about Nathan, it felt like we were constantly walking on eggshells around each other. She wasn't the same Emily, the one who used to laugh at my corny jokes, leave little notes in my lunchbox, or sing off-key while making pancakes on Saturday mornings. She became distant, emotionally and physically. It wasn't a dramatic shift at first, just little things. She stopped texting me cute emojis during the day, and her goodnight kisses grew quicker, almost mechanical. Our conversations felt strained, like we were coworkers making small talk rather than a couple who used to share everything. At first, I thought she just needed some space. Everyone has rough patches, right? I figured she was still upset about the dinner argument and that she'd come around eventually. But weeks turned into months, and the distance only grew. We still did the basic things, dinners, grocery shopping, even the occasional movie night. But it felt like we were going through the motions. The warmth that made our relationship special had evaporated. And then there was her best friend, Rachel. Rachel had always been a part of Emily's life, but back then, she was more of a background character in our story. They'd grab coffee together after work or catch up over the phone, but she rarely came over. That started to change around the time Emily and I hit our cold spell. At first, I didn't think much of it. Rachel was Emily's best friend, after all, and it made sense that she'd turn to her for support if something was bothering her. But then Rachel started showing up at our house all the time. It began subtly. She'd drop by after work to check on Emily or bring over dessert she'd baked. Soon, she was there almost every evening, lounging on our couch like she lived there. They'd sit together, heads bent close as they whispered and laughed about things I wasn't privy to. If I walked into the room, the conversation would halt, and they'd exchange these looks, like I was interrupting something private. I tried to brush it off. Rachel had always been a little intense, but she and Emily had been friends for years. If anyone could help Emily through whatever she was dealing with, it was Rachel. But the more Rachel came around, the more excluded I started to feel in my own home. One night, I came home late from work to find them sitting at the kitchen table, sharing a bottle of wine. Emily barely looked up when I walked in. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "What's going on?" "Nothing," Emily replied, a little too quickly. "Just catching up with Rachel." I nodded, but as I walked past them to grab a glass of water, I noticed Rachel's eyes lingering on me. There was something about the way she looked at me, almost smug, like she knew something I didn't. Over time, little things about Rachel's visits started to bother me. She'd stay late, sometimes until midnight, even on weekdays. Once, I walked into the living room to find her sitting way too close to Emily on the couch, their legs practically touching as they watched some show. Another time, I overheard Rachel talking to Emily in the kitchen. I couldn't make out everything they were saying, but I caught snippets. "You don't owe him an explanation," Rachel's voice was low but firm. "It's not that simple," Emily sounded conflicted. I didn't confront them about it. I told myself it was just my imagination running wild, that they were probably talking about work drama or something equally mundane. But deep down, something felt off. The coldness in our relationship reached its peak one weekend when I suggested we spend some quality time together, a picnic at the park, just the two of us. Emily hesitated, then said she already had plans with Rachel. "Can't she reschedule?" I asked, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "She's going through a lot right now," Emily replied, almost defensively. "She needs me." I wanted to ask, "What about me? Don't I need you too?" But I didn't. Instead, I let it slide, just like I had with everything else. The truth is, I was scared. Scared that if I pushed too hard, Emily would shut down even more, or worse, walk away altogether. So I stayed quiet, convincing myself that this was just a phase. What I didn't know was that this phase was only the beginning. After 6 months of cold silence, strained conversations, and Rachel practically becoming a third member of our household, I knew something had to give. I couldn't keep walking on eggshells around Emily, pretending like everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. That's when the idea of a vacation hit me. We hadn't taken a proper trip together since our honeymoon phase, and I thought maybe getting away from the daily grind, and Rachel, could help us reconnect. At first, Emily wasn't on board. "Work is crazy right now," she said with a sigh. "I don't think I can take time off." I pushed gently, reminding her how stressed she'd been lately. "A break might be exactly what we need," I said. "Just you and me. No distractions, no schedules, just some time to breathe." Finally, she relented. A week later, we packed our bags and boarded a plane for the first real vacation we'd had in years, a trip to the coast. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. From the moment we arrived, it felt like a weight had been lifted. The salty breeze, the sound of waves crashing against the shore, the endless horizon, it was like stepping into another world. We stayed in a cozy beachfront cottage with large windows that opened up to a view of the ocean. The first night, we sat on the deck with a bottle of wine, watching the sun dip below the waterline, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. For the first time in what felt like forever, Emily looked relaxed. "This is nice," she said softly, leaning her head against my shoulder. I smiled, the tension in my chest loosening just a little. Yeah, it is. Over the next few days, it was like we'd stepped back in time to the early days of our relationship. We went on long walks along the shore, collecting seashells and letting the cold water lap at our feet. Emily even brought her camera, snapping candid photos of me struggling to skip rocks and laughing when I inevitably failed. "You're hopeless," she teased, her cheerful tone warming my heart. "Hey, someone has to make you laugh," I shot back, grinning. We tried new things, too, like kayaking through a serene lagoon and taking a cooking class where we learned how to make fresh seafood paella. At one point, Emily accidentally spilled paprika all over the stove, and we both doubled over in laughter as the instructor frantically tried to clean it up. At night, we'd curl up in bed and talk like we used to, about anything and everything. She told me about a project she wanted to pitch at work, and I shared some of my own career frustrations. For the first time in months, I felt like we were a team again. One evening, we built a bonfire on the beach, just the two of us. Emily sat cross-legged in the sand, poking at the flames with a stick, her face glowing in the firelight. "Thank you," she said suddenly, her voice soft. "For what?" I asked. "For this," she replied, gesturing around us. "For not giving up on me." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I reached over, taking her hand in mine. "I could never give up on you, Emily." She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that I hadn't seen in what felt like forever. For the rest of the trip, things felt normal again. Better than normal, even. We were laughing, holding hands, stealing kisses under the moonlight. It was like the Emily I fell in love with had returned, and I couldn't have been happier. By the time we boarded the plane home, I was convinced that the worst was behind us. Whatever had been bothering her, whether it was work stress, personal struggles, or even my questions about Nathan, it felt like we'd finally turned a corner. I remember looking at her during the flight, her head resting on my shoulder as she dozed off, and thinking, we're going to be okay. But looking back now, I realized the vacation was just a band-aid over a wound I didn't even know existed. For those 7 days, I thought we were healing. I didn't know that everything was about to come crashing down, and that the truth would be so much worse than anything I could have imagined. When we got back from the vacation, it was like the spark that had been missing in our relationship had finally reignited. For the first time in months, Emily seemed like her old self, cheerful, affectionate, and present. She'd greet me with a kiss when I came home from work, ask about my day, and actually listen to my rambling stories about office politics. It felt good. No, it felt great. I made an effort too. I started cooking more dinners for us, even if my version of cooking usually meant overcooked pasta and a jar of store-bought marinara. Emily didn't seem to mind. She'd laugh, teasing me about how I'd burn water if left alone for too long, then we'd end up ordering takeout anyway. The nights were better, too. We'd cuddle on the couch, binge-watching old sitcoms and sharing a bowl of popcorn. I'd catch her looking at me sometimes, that soft, dreamy look in her eyes that reminded me why I fell in love with her in the first place. For a while, it felt like we were untouchable. But, of course, Rachel was still a part of the picture. In the first week after our vacation, Rachel came over twice. She claimed she just wanted to hear all about the trip, but I couldn't help but feel like she was checking in, like she needed reassurance that her place in Emily's life was still secure. "Oh my gosh," Rachel said as Emily showed her pictures from our beach bonfire night. "You two are so adorable it's almost annoying." "Almost?" I joked, trying to keep things light. Rachel smirked at me, but something about her expression felt off. Like there was an inside joke I wasn't in on. The following week, Rachel's visits became more frequent again. She'd stop by after work, just for a quick coffee, and end up staying for hours. Sometimes it was fine, the three of us would sit around chatting about random things, and I'd even catch myself enjoying her company. But other times, it was like I wasn't even there. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. One evening, I came home to find Rachel and Emily sprawled out on the living room floor, a pile of magazines and fabric swatches spread between them. "What's all this?" I asked, setting my bag down. "Rachel wants to redecorate her apartment," Emily said without looking up. "She's thinking of going for a boho chic vibe." "Boho what?" I said, half joking, but Rachel rolled her eyes like I'd just asked what color the sky was. "You wouldn't get it," she said with a sly smile. Emily giggled, and for a moment, I felt like I was intruding on something private. As the days went on, Rachel's presence became more and more ingrained in our lives. She'd show up unannounced, stay for dinner, and even join us for game nights. Emily didn't seem to think it was strange, in fact, she welcomed it. "She's been my best friend forever," she said one night when I brought it up. "She's like family to me." I didn't have the heart to argue. Emily was happy, and after everything we'd been through, that's all I wanted. Still, there were moments when Rachel's involvement felt excessive. Like the time Emily and I planned a quiet date night at home, only for Rachel to call halfway through with some emergency involving a broken lamp. Emily left to help her, promising she'd be back in a flash. She didn't return until almost midnight. Or the time Rachel suggested the three of us take a weekend trip together, to relive the magic of your vacation. "It's not a bad idea," Emily said, looking at me with hopeful eyes. I forced a smile. "Let's think about it." But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that Rachel wasn't just a friend. She was a constant presence, a shadow that loomed over our relationship even when things were good. For that month, I convinced myself that everything was fine. That the warmth Emily and I had rediscovered would last forever. But, as always, Rachel wasn't just a harmless guest in our lives. She was a puzzle piece I couldn't quite fit into place, and I was about to find out why. The warmth from our vacation was beginning to cool, little by little, like the last embers of a fire struggling to stay alive. For a while, I convinced myself that things were okay. Emily seemed happy, happier than she'd been in months, and I clung to that like a lifeline. But there were small things, little signs that made my gut twist with unease. Her phone, for instance. Emily had never been secretive about it before, often leaving it lying around or asking me to check her messages if she was busy cooking. But lately, it was glued to her side, as if it were an extension of her hand. She'd quickly lock the screen whenever I walked by, offering a sheepish smile and saying, "Work stuff. Boring." Then there were her late nights. She'd always had a steady schedule, but recently, she started staying late at the office more often. "There's just so much to catch up on," she'd say, brushing it off like it was no big deal. It wasn't just the schedule changes, though, it was the way she talked about work. She'd gone from venting about office politics to being oddly vague, avoiding specifics whenever I asked. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was being paranoid. After all, we'd just had an incredible vacation, and things were good. Weren't they? Still, that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. The turning point came one evening when I came home to find Rachel and Emily laughing over wine in the kitchen. They were huddled close, whispering about something that made Rachel throw her head back in laughter. "Hey," I said, forcing a smile as I set my bag down. "What's so funny?" Rachel shot me one of her trademark sly smiles. "Oh, nothing. Just girl talk." Emily avoided my gaze, busying herself with pouring another glass of wine. Something about the way they were acting set me on edge. I didn't say anything, but as I sat there eating dinner alone while they giggled in the living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being shut out of my own life. The next day, Emily left for work early, and I decided I needed answers. I told myself I just wanted to surprise her, to bring her lunch as a kind gesture and remind her I was still thinking about her. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I needed to see for myself what was going on. I left the house around noon, picking up a box of her favorite sushi from the restaurant down the street. As I drove to her office, my mind raced with possibilities. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe this was all in my head. When I arrived at her building, I parked in the visitor lot and made my way to the front desk. The receptionist greeted me with a polite smile, her eyes flicking to the box in my hands. "Hi, I'm here to see Emily," I said, my voice steady despite the knot tightening in my chest. "Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference." "Oh, she's on the 3rd floor," the receptionist replied, gesturing toward the elevator. "You can head on up." I thanked her and stepped into the elevator, my heart pounding with every passing second. As the doors opened on the 3rd floor, I was met with the familiar hum of an office, keyboards clacking, phones ringing, the murmur of coworkers chatting. I followed the hallway toward Emily's office, the sushi box feeling heavier with each step. Her door was slightly ajar, and as I approached, I could hear faint voices inside. I paused for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Something about the tone of the voices made me hesitate, my instinct screaming at me to turn around. But I didn't. I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking softly as I stepped inside. And that's when I saw it. The moment I pushed the door open, it felt like the world stopped. There they were, Emily and Rachel, half-dressed, tangled together on her office couch. Emily's blouse was undone, and Rachel's shirt was tossed haphazardly on the floor. Their heads snapped toward me, their faces frozen in shock. For a second, I couldn't move. My hands felt like lead, and my legs like jelly. My mind tried to reject what my eyes were seeing. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. But then Emily spoke. "Are you sure you closed the door?" she whispered in a shaky voice, her eyes locked on Rachel. Before Rachel could respond, I stepped fully into the room, my voice cold and flat. "No, she didn't." They both jolted, scrambling to cover themselves. Emily's face went from pale to red in an instant, and Rachel grabbed a jacket from the armrest to shield herself. My hands were shaking, but instinct took over. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and snapped a picture. The sound of the camera shutter echoed in the room like a gunshot. "What are you doing?" Emily shouted, panic written all over her face. "What does it look like I'm doing?" I shot back, my voice trembling with rage. "Making sure I don't forget this moment." Rachel opened her mouth as if to say something, but I cut her off with a glare. "Don't say a word." I turned back to Emily, holding up the box of sushi I'd brought. "I came here to surprise you," I said, my voice breaking despite my best efforts to stay composed. But I guess the surprise was on me. I threw the box onto the couch, its contents spilling across the cushions. The smell of soy sauce and wasabi filled the room as the carefully packed rolls fell apart, much like my life at that very moment. "Wait," Emily said, stepping toward me, her hands raised as if to calm me down. "Let me explain." "Explain?" I barked, taking a step back. "Explain what, Emily? That you've been sneaking around behind my back this whole time? That I was just some cover for whatever this is?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. I was too angry, too hurt, to feel anything but raw betrayal. "Get Rachel out of here," I said through clenched teeth. "Now." Rachel hesitated, glancing at Emily as if waiting for permission to leave. Emily gave her a small nod, and Rachel quickly gathered her things, avoiding my gaze as she slipped out the door. Once she was gone, the room fell into an unbearable silence. Emily stood there, her blouse still half-buttoned, tears streaming down her face. But I wasn't ready to let her cry her way out of this. "Start talking," I demanded. "And don't you dare lie to me." She wiped her eyes, her hands trembling. I didn't want you to find out this way, she stammered. Then how exactly were you planning on me finding out, Emily? I shot back. Or were you just going to keep lying to me forever? She looked down, unable to meet my gaze. I was going to tell you, eventually. Eventually, I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Well, I guess you didn't have to, did you? Because now I know. So tell me, how long has this been going on? Emily hesitated, biting her lip like she was trying to find the right words. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. Since before we got married, she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The room spun. I gripped the edge of her desk to steady myself. Before we got married? I repeated, my heart sinking further. So this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't some drunken lapse in judgment. This was planned. She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. It started when we were teenagers, she confessed. Rachel and I, we've been together since we were 16. I stared at her, the weight of her words crashing down on me like a tidal wave. You've been together since you were 16, I said slowly, trying to process what she was saying. Then why the hell did you marry me, Emily? Her face crumpled, and she sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. I was scared, she sobbed. Scared of what people would think. Scared of how my family would react. I thought if I married you, I could make it go away. Make it go away, I repeated, the bitterness in my voice rising. So I was what? Some kind of shield? A pawn in your little game to hide who you really are? She didn't answer, and that silence told me everything I needed to know. I turned on my heel and walked out the door, slamming it behind me. I drove home in a daze, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Emily's words echoed in my head, each one cutting deeper than the last. I thought if I married you, I could make it go away. I couldn't believe it. The woman I had spent years building a life with, the one I thought was my partner, my equal, had been lying to me from the very beginning. When I got home, I sat in the driveway for what felt like hours, staring blankly at the dashboard. I wasn't sure what I felt anymore. Anger, sadness, humiliation, they all swirled together into a storm I couldn't contain. The picture I had taken burned a hole in my pocket. I pulled out my phone and stared at it, my finger hovering over the delete button. But I didn't press it. Something inside me told me I'd need it. When Emily got home later that night, I was waiting for her in the living room. Sit, I said coldly as she stepped through the door. She froze, her eyes red and puffy, but she obeyed. She sat down on the edge of the couch, her hands twisting in her lap. We're going to talk, I said, my voice low and steady. And you're going to tell me everything. No more lies, no more half-truths. I want the whole story. Emily hesitated, her eyes darting to the floor. Start talking, I said sharply. She took a deep breath, her voice shaking as she began. Rachel and I, we've been together since we were 16. Back then, it wasn't serious. We were just figuring things out, but it always felt right. But I was scared. My family is conservative, and I knew they'd never accept it. So I started dating boys, trying to convince myself I could be normal. Her voice cracked on the last word, but I didn't interrupt. When I started dating Nathan, it wasn't because I loved him, she continued. It was because it was easy. He was successful, he treated me well, and people approved of us. But Rachel and I never stopped seeing each other. Even when Nathan and I were at our best, she was always there, in the background. And when Nathan found out? I asked, my voice ice cold. She winced, tears spilling down her cheeks. He was furious. He broke up with me on the spot and told me to leave the company. But I begged him to let me stay. I promised him it was over, that I'd never see Rachel again. And he believed me, for a while. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. So when you started dating me, you were still seeing her, weren't you? Emily nodded, her sobs growing louder. At first, I thought I could do it. I thought I could let her go and be the wife you deserved. But I couldn't. I tried to stop, I really did, but I love her. Her words hit me like a physical blow. Do you even realize what you've done to me? I said, my voice trembling with fury. You stole years of my life, Emily. You lied to me every single day of our marriage. And for what? To keep up appearances? She didn't respond, her face buried in her hands. For a moment, the room was silent except for her sobs. Then I stood up, pulling my phone out of my pocket. I took this today, I said, holding up the picture of her and Rachel in the office. Emily's head shot up, her eyes widening in horror. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference. You took a picture? Of course I did, I snapped. Because I wanted proof. Proof that the woman I thought I knew was nothing but a liar and a coward. Her face crumpled, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. This isn't over, I said, heading toward the door. You're going to face the consequences of what you've done. And when I'm through, you won't have anything left to hide behind. Wait, she cried, scrambling to her feet. Please, don't do this. We can fix this. I'll do anything. I turned back to her, my expression cold. You already did enough, Emily. And with that, I walked out, slamming the door behind me. The days that followed were a blur of planning and raw emotion. Every time I thought about Emily's betrayal, that image, her and Rachel tangled together in her office, flashed in my mind. It fueled me, kept me focused on one thing, making her face the truth she'd worked so hard to hide. Emily had stolen my trust, my time, my marriage. She had humiliated me, and I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. I started by printing the picture. One crisp, damning photo that captured everything: Emily's unbuttoned blouse, Rachel's startled face, the office couch that had no business hosting that kind of betrayal. I stared at it for hours, letting the weight of it sink in. My first move was small, but impactful. I slipped a copy of the photo into an envelope and mailed it anonymously to her office, addressed to the HR department. I knew it wouldn't take long for the picture to spread. The second move required a little more creativity. I made a few calls to a friend of mine who owned a local print shop. By the next morning, posters with that same photo were plastered all over town, on telephone poles, bus stops, even the front door of her office building. The fallout was immediate. Emily called me that afternoon, her voice trembling with rage and panic. "What did you do?" she screamed into the phone. "I made sure the truth was impossible to ignore," I replied calmly. "Isn't that what you were always afraid of? That people would find out? Do you have any idea what you've done to me?" she cried. "I can't show my face anywhere. My boss is talking about firing me. Rachel won't even leave her apartment." I felt a flicker of satisfaction at her words. "Good," I said coldly. "Now you know how it feels to have your life torn apart." I hung up before she could respond, feeling a surge of vindication. But I wasn't done. Using the contact list from our wedding invitations, I sent an email to all our family and friends, attaching the photo and a short, blunt explanation of what had happened. "Dear friends and family, I regret to inform you that Emily and I are separating. As you can see from the attached photo, she has been unfaithful for the entirety of our marriage. I feel you all deserve to know the truth. Sincerely. My name." The responses poured in almost immediately. Some were shocked, some sympathetic, and a few were downright furious on my behalf. Emily's carefully crafted image of a perfect wife was crumbling, and I had no regrets. My final move came a week later. I contacted a local tabloid and offered them the story. They paid me a small fee for the photo and ran an article about the scandalous double life of a local businesswoman. It was petty, I'll admit, but at that point, I didn't care. Emily called me one last time after the article came out. "Why are you doing this?" she sobbed, her voice breaking. "Haven't you done enough?" "No," I replied evenly. "Because this isn't just about what you did to me. It's about the lies, the manipulation, the way you used people to protect yourself. You can't hide anymore, Emily. This is the bed you made, and now you have to lie in it." She begged, pleaded, even threatened to sue me for defamation, but I knew she didn't have a leg to stand on. Everything I'd shared was the truth, and she knew it. It's been months since everything went down. Emily and Rachel moved to another city, trying to escape the mess they left behind. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Emily lost her job and has been struggling to find work. Rachel apparently cut ties with her after the story broke, leaving Emily completely alone. As for me, I've started to rebuild. Therapy has been a lifesaver, helping me process the betrayal and channel my anger into something healthier. I've reconnected with old friends, thrown myself into my work, and even started dating again, though trust is still something I'm working on. Do I regret what I did? No. Emily's lies cost me years of my life, and while revenge didn't erase the pain, it gave me closure. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that the truth always comes out. No matter how carefully someone tries to bury it, it finds a way to the surface. And when it does, you'd better be ready to face the consequences. Support the channel by subscribing, it really makes a difference.